Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are taking a look at some of the changes coming to fleet selection, which were sort of preluded coming in the new Imperium and Crown ORBATs that were released, mostly due to the release of the two-player starter set called Sturginium Skies. The intent of this video is not to go into detail about what exactly changed in each one of them, but rather go over the broad strokes with which each ORBAT was changed, because that is going to have a big impact on all of the other ORBATs coming up reasonably soon. Now, usually Warcradle does these, big updates to all of the ORBATs every 6 months, and then the rest of them receive smaller updates in between whenever there's a big release like Sturginium Skies. Should you want to stay up to date with all of these small tweaks though, make sure that you hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for any future updates so you can stay in the loop for all of the different things for Dystopian Wars. And the first big general change in these two ORBATs is that they got a new layout as an update. The ships are now split into, flagships still, but then they get divided up into surface units and aerial units in both of these, because the Imperium and the Crown do not have any skimming units as of yet. And the other thing is, with this new layout comes a new way to do your fleet selection. They started using pictograms to sort of show you what you can include in each one of these fleets. And the generic faction battle fleets have undergone a few changes in this one. Now, I've included the example of the Imperium one here on the right, and as you can see, it has one flagship symbol here that you must include one of. And the only restrictions in this is that it must have the Imperium trait. The position trait of the flagship has no consequences to any other limits in the battle fleet. And then you must include one other surface unit. This is the pictogram that depicts that one. And these surface units must have the Imperium trait. That means that a fleet consisting of only flagships is no longer an option, because the most standard fleet, the faction battle fleet, requires you to have at least one surface unit. The symbol underneath it is for submerged units, and the standard Imperium faction battle fleet can only include one of them, with not a lot of restrictions. They just need the Imperium trait. This is the symbol for a skimming unit, and the standard battle fleet requires you, or only allows you to have one of them. And this is the symbol for an aerial unit, of which you can include just one as well in the standard faction battle fleet. Now, each of these battle fleets comes with their own bonus, which is given below. Normally, these Imperium or other faction fleets do not provide any bonuses, but they did make a neat little tweak to it. That is a rule called strategic reserves. Strategic reserves is a rule that forces you to put the entire battle fleet into reserves. However, you can always change the result of your reserves die to become a heavy hit. In practice, that means that that unit will not automatically be showing up in the first turn, because you need an exploding hit for that. You're still allowed to roll for it. I mean, you might get lucky in turn 1, but it does mean that they will guarantee come on in turn 2, so I can actually still see a use for the generic faction battle fleet by using this new strategic reserves battle fleet bonus. The other fleet, the non-faction battle fleets, are now mostly divided up depending on their role, and the bonus that they provide is associated with that role. As a for instance, I've included the British frontline battle fleet here. As you can see, still one flagship, but if you want a frontline battle fleet, you're going to have to choose between either the Britannia class, the Gloriana class, which is the big Mass 4 ship that is not yet released, or a Sabre class. Any one of those can lead one of these themed fleets. And you have to include one surface ship, and you can include a further 2 on top of that. Those surface units do need to have the British trait, with a exemption from the you can only have one unit of each type, because this specific frontline battle fleet allows you to use multiple Albion or Caliburn class units should you so desire. In terms of submarines, you can only include one of them with the very minimal restriction that it just needs the British trade. So you can include a couple of Morganas or a unit of 2 Morganas in there should you so desire. And for the aerial units, you may include up to 2 with no restrictions other than they must have the British trade. That does not mean that you can include 2 Prydain class units, because there is no exemption from the generic restriction that you can only include 1 of each type of unit. And this one also comes with a new bonus called Valorous Conduct. Now what is Valorous Conduct? It means that for every battle fleet that has this rule, once per turn you may play a Valor effect as if it had a value of 50 for the sake of countering it, or rather cancelling it through Fortunes of War or similar effects. So that means that if you're using these frontline battle fleets for those battleships, the chances of their heavy magazines rules, for instance, or rather heavy firepower rule, is going to come through more easily, or rather your opponent is going to have to spend way more resources to try to stop them. Now it's not that simple to just say that, oh, that means that all frontline battle fleets will have that new Valorous Conduct. No, for instance, this is the Canadian frontline battle fleet. You'll see the makeup is slightly different. This one allows for up to 2 different submerged units to be included, but at the end of it, the bonus is the Snowbird Strike. That we all know from the previous Orbat, allowing you to send in a stack of SRS tokens in the 2nd and 4th round. So these bonuses can still be tied to a certain nation, and it sort of depends on which one it is, and what nation it is, I should say, and what their role is. Now, personally, I really like this change. I mean, you can still play very flagship heavy if you desire to do so, but you won't be able to just use flagships from now on. But the thing that I am most excited about is that expanding your fleet doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to expand by getting more flagships. The big problem with the Crown battle fleet that was in the Sturginium skies was that it only had a single flagship unit, and there was no fleet that just allowed you to take the whole force in one go technically. That has been fixed because some of these new battle fleets actually fill in some of the gaps that are there, because the whole range is not yet released. You can't just release everything in one go. An example of that is the one shown above, the British Rotor battle fleet. You have to include 1 flagship, and you must include 1 flying unit, and can expand with a further 3. So very much an aerial themed fleet, and it actually doesn't give you any bonuses. It just allows you to go full aerial and don't have any surface ships. The more interesting part is where they describe the flagships. Why? The flagship can only be an Avalon class trade. We have not seen that one yet. That's the big aerial ship coming out somewhere in the first half of next year, I believe. Or it can have the Prydain class trait. And if you do that, it also gets the flagship trait. There doesn't seem to be any limit on the fact that it needs to be a full unit of 3 Prydains. You can just have a single one of them and say like, well, this is my flagship and it's going to lead my unit of or rather my battle fleet of flyers. Although it probably isn't that advisable to go and slap a flagship trait on a single mass 2 ship, because at some point you're just handing over victory points to your opponent that you don't really want to hand out. But yeah, it does fill in some of the gaps, and there's a similar thing going on, if I'm not mistaken, with the Imperium side for the Bavarians. Some of these aerial ships were able to be built as Bavarians, but there is no flagship out yet for them. It's called the Maximilian class, but the Bavarians can use the Nuremberg, the Mass 2 unit, as a flagship should they so desire. And that doesn't mean that that is the only thing that you can do with an Avalon. The Avalon is shown here as an example that can be used as a flagship for multiple types of unit. The Avalon can also be used to lead a British support battle fleet, because those flagships can either have the Victory class, Avalon class or Camelot class trait. And that one doesn't count towards any of the restrictions. So it is more flexible than ever before to build your fleet. And yeah, I think that is a great thing, because it means you can just use all of the toys you got in your box straight out of the gate, which I can only applaud. 2 thumbs up. Now, it also doesn't mean that every faction just gets a copy of each other's fleets. Some of these bonuses are very much faction dependent, and there's also a couple of very fun themed fleets and mercenaries included in these as well. I've included 2 examples of these. The first one is the Prussian Iron Skies battle fleet. Now, if we look at it, it must include 1 flagship, which has to be a Zeppelin, and then you can include you have to include at least 3 other Zeppelins. So you're essentially sending in 4 doom balloons when you use this one. But they come with a very interesting trade-off. They lose the flagships, the ones that you choose as the additional ones, but they now have the unexpected arrival rule that they can use. So there's some very fun little themed fleets for those crazy enough to just go like, well, I've got 4 doom balloons, why don't I just use them? And they've also, in my opinion, fixed some of the other fleets like the Teutonic Colossus battle fleet. Like I've shown you with the Pridanes, you do not need full units anymore to operate as a flagship. The Teutonic Colossus battle fleet needs to have 1 flagship, which is just a Hochmeister unit in this case, and it gains that flagship trait. The position trait does not count towards any limits in the fleet, and then you can include you must include 1 or an additional one of your choice for the surface units, but those surface units need to have the Hochmeister or the Metzger class traits. That means that if you buy one of these boxes, you can just build 2 of them as the Metzger, attach the Hochmeister to it as the flagship, and then bam, that's your whole unit that you can just deploy in one go without the need to select 3 Hochmeisters, which is already more than 1/3 of your points limit in a standard game. So yeah, more flexibility to build them out, and you do gain that nice little elite crew that you got before, which makes it a very solid option and more flexible. And the one thing I will say that I hope there will be a solution for in the next 6 monthly update if need be, but is perhaps an option to have a battle fleet specifically for your fortifications. The platforms look like an amazing little kit, but they can only be fitted really into the generic battle fleet for a faction. And it's sort of odd that you have to go and look for another flagship just to include a couple of fortifications. It might not be a bad idea to have 1 battle fleet in there that doesn't even require a flagship as a mandatory choice, or have one of the options of taking 1 type of fortification that acts as a flagship for that one, and then allows you to build one. For instance, the Imperium would have the Croatian battle fleet, or the Croatian fortification battle fleet, and then you can just select them as you go. But yeah, that's just something for the future, I hope. Now, the new way of how you select the fleet was of course the big news, the fact that there's changes coming to that, but those were not the only updates, of course. There are some general tendencies, and the first one is actually one that isn't on here, and something that makes me quite happy. There are changes, for sure, but they are not that massive. I mean, there is a certain degree of rules stability coming now, and I actually think that's a good thing. I love these updates every 6 months to show you what's going on and fix the things that need fixing, but just change for the sake of change is not something that's very pleasant. You do have to relearn a whole bunch of rules every single time, and yeah, we're seeing a lot of rule stability from one to the next, which I can only applaud as well. Other than that though, there are a couple of tweaks, big points tweaks to some of the more maligned ships out there, like the British Victory class. That one has gotten substantial points drops, and the Zeppelins, the new Zeppelins as well, got a healthy little points adjustment downwards, because they were somewhat on the frail end of the scale for their previous points cost, so that's good. There have been a lot of tweaks though to the carriers, not so much rules wise. Generally they got like a 10 or 15 points bump upwards to make them slightly more expensive, because they were quite good. But the biggest change in my book is that they now have profiles that have lower hull points in the battle ready state and more hull points in the crippled state, meaning they are easier to cripple compared to their battleship equivalents, which makes a lot of sense. You would assume those deckings and hulls can't take quite the beating that a battleship would. There's also a nerf to combat air patrol. If you want to, you don't have to use the rule anymore, but if you're using combat air patrol to drop your SRS tokens anywhere on the battle fleet, you can only do so with the crippled SRS count instead of the full battle ready one. Flag barrage has been bumped up to help some anti-SRS tech as well. It is now a set number of dice, which works a lot easier. You don't have to look up any weapons anymore. It just says like, this thing has flag barrage 10, that's the number of dice you roll for it. And the big change is that it is now for each model in the unit. So if you've got a unit of 4, for instance Kriegssturm, who have flag barrage 5, oh great, you're now chucking 20 dice, whereas before you wouldn't have. There was also a small tweak to Spotter. It no longer provides sustained if you've got an SRS token on the target, but it now provides reroll blanks with any extreme range weapons. Alternatively, so it does say alternatively, so I wrote down or, it can remove the obscured bonus with any type of weapon, not just the extreme range weapons. So that can help as well to flush out some obscure targets or to hunt down things with the Shroud Generator. And a big change as well coming up is a tweak to lumbering. Lumbering now limits the drift a model can make to be a max of 3 inch, which I personally think makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Ice Maiden was a so-called lumbering model, but because it still had a drift of 6, it was one of the, faster flagships out there currently, which makes no sense whatsoever when you think of the word lumbering. So yeah, there's a bit of a tweak there as well with that one. And there you have it. Those were the general tendencies found in those 2 Orbats. Definitely check them out if you haven't yet, and I hope this helps you stay in the loop a bit. If it did, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for any future updates, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!